Andy, how you going?
Yeah, good. You?
Yeah, good. Just choked on a mandarin, so.
I was going to say, you don't sound too good.
I'll go on mute, cough it for a bit and recover.
That was wonderful. What did the agency treating you?
Not too bad. Yeah, good day yesterday. Can't complain.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, you weren't working yesterday, so of course you can't complain.
So I had quite a few meetings deleted and resent and stuff like that. So we'll just see how many.
Yeah, Angus, I just kind of accepted them all, thinking it's all good.
Yeah.
And then Angus said to me he didn't have a meeting invite, so.
Yeah. He'd been communicating.
But surprisingly, I'm here now.
You are?
You've once again matched your background. You are so Telstra Health Chorus 1. All we need to get you is some blue glasses, I think, and you'd be set.
I told you that a lot of these logos Telstra has this slogan, "Here for life." It's just going a bit far, isn't it?
That sounds like a sentence, not a job.
I think it means life for our customers or our patients, but it's your backdrop. It kind of feels like you've just committed.
That is pretty weird.
Managed to build the IG. They got 0 warnings. How they get 0 warnings? I can't do that yet.
That's because you just get it to ignore all warnings.
Ignore all warnings.
Easy.
And just running it. It's so much more verbose. My experience of running IGs, I've got a lot now of running my chorusy, Telstra ones, and you get used to like the pattern of running. And then when I run the eRequesting one, it's so verbose. It just logs so much stuff, and I'm sort of like going, "What's it doing?"
Well, in sushi.yaml, there's a whole bunch of options about what you want
verbosity.
Yeah, you can get
in the publisher. I felt it was more the publisher being verbose than sushi. Sushi wasn't.
But sushi.yaml creates the publisher guidance. Yeah.
So there must be stuff in there.
It's kind of black magic though, because if you go look at all of those options you can do, and they get quite complicated. And I'm lazy, so I don't. It's not like I read off an explicit list.
Yeah.
Oh.
Janie.
Janie. Oh, that's better. Who muted her? I wonder if this is the only people who got the update in the booking
number. Yeah, well, I wouldn't have been here if I wasn't so conscientious. 9. We got 9 people.
I don't know. I think it was Brett. I don't know. I didn't really take notice. I didn't create a new booking, so I'm presuming someone else did.
We normally get, 30 to 40 people?
Yeah.
I think I replied to you and Brett saying that mine had been deleted, and then a little while later it popped up again. So
yeah, I'll reach out to Brett after this and try to find out what happened. I'm assuming you got an updated invite.
Yeah, there was a series of different emails coming out about a few different things. So I assume there's been a bit of a issue on HL7 side.
And if you're on AU Core, you would have got 1,000 emails.
Yeah.
Feels like we've lost a lot of people. With 5 minutes in, we've got 11 people. We usually have about 30. I had to ask Andy, where's the invite? I wouldn't be here if I just was a normal person.
Oh,
Can we flick the invite out to the email group just as a reminder?
Can you push it out now somehow?
anyone remember what the email address is?
I wrote them all down yesterday from Brett's email.
Hang on.
Find them. A few more.
That's a very good question about terminology work group. I will. I'll reach out. Well, I'll go to Brett and to the terminology coaches and find out.
Do you want to put the email thing in the chat?
Let's do the same, but you beat me. Yep, it's the same one I was going to do.
Slowly coming in. Let me present. Sorry, I'm just getting coordinated. Hopefully you're all here for the eRequesting workgroup meeting. Let me start. I'll just do the acknowledgement of country. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we stand. For elders past and present, for me, it's the Turrbal and Yagara people in Brisbane. You're all in different parts of the country, so to each their own. Today is the 13th of August. Here is our agenda for today. First thing we're going to do is ask if anyone has any additional things they want to add to the agenda. Either yell out or stick up your hand. Okay, let me go back to the meeting minutes from the 30th of August. Has everyone had an opportunity to look back through that? Big part of it was Jim talking about the terminology implementation guide and ways of working with terminology going forward as they kind of pull themselves up from their bootstraps. We also did a fair bit of talking around Specimen and what we are looking to do with representing Specimen in requests. And we didn't get on to transfer of fulfillment, but that's waiting in the wings for when we have an opportunity to do that. Would anyone like to raise a motion to accept these minutes?
I'm happy to motion to accept the minutes.
Thank you, Jai. Is anyone happy to second that motion?
I'll second it, Andy. Angus.
Good. We're all good with that, David. Let's go and see if anyone wishes to abstain. Just maybe just raise your hand. We'll count the abstentions. 1. Okay, it looks like we have one abstention, which is voting Kenneth on last time's minutes or from the last meeting. Would anyone like to vote in the negative for the minutes? Nope. All right, you can count the rest except me as the affirmatives, David. What's that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7,
I got
8.
14 minus 1, 13.
Minus 1 abstention.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, 12. Yeah, I get my maths right.
Always good practice once a week. Alrighty. Let's go back to today's agenda. I think the MPAC implications, was this raised by Vince?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was. Well, Vince, and then I think somebody in the players queried it or queried.
I think Angus, we were having a chat about this, about the mappings of acknowledgements
and tasks.
Yeah, so pretty much these are all kind of lining up with the task.status values that we have. So obviously we go through requested, received, accepted, in progress, completed as the kind of the mandatory tasks, with the cancelled, rejected and failed as failure states. And I think we were talking received, accepted. You're better than this, Angus. Received is technical acknowledgement.
So in V2 they send a message. Let's just talk about reports. It's the same if you're talking about e-orders. So they send a message and synchronously get back. They get a transport acknowledgement to say the other systems received that message. But then once that message is delivered to the desired application and is accessible to the user, you then get an application accept message back, and this is all V2. So V2 is pretty much one to say the system you literally sent it to got it synchronously, and then a later asynchronous acknowledgement to say it is now delivered to the destination that you intended it to be delivered at. So that's their two acknowledgements. In Fire, we have far more, and we have those equal ones. So when you actually post a bundle of the eRequest into a Fire server, you get a 200 OK back from HTTP. That is the akin of your transport acknowledgement. The server has successfully received the payload and is telling you that synchronously. And then part of that payload is a Fire task resource. And then when the destination system consumes that order and successfully stores it and it's ready for their users, they update the task status to say accepted, and then that is echoed back to the person who had sent it in the first place. And so that's now equal and akin to the V2 acknowledgements. And then Fire goes on and on beyond that. So then we've got in progress to say something's happening with that order, and we've got completed to say that thing has now finished. So we have the V2 acknowledgements, and then we have more after that, and we have the capability to have N after that. But in eRequesting, it's defined. We have a defined set. I'm just meaning in the abstract, we could have as many states as we like. But in eRequesting, there's a defined state machine. And you can show the task state machine if you really want to.
That'd be too much work. Although I do have the spec up.
Yeah.
I think it's in.
There it is. Yep, there it is. So that diagram there is into our acknowledgement. The only one that's missing here is the transport acknowledgement, the HTTP 200 OK, which is kind of not part of Fire, it's part of HTTP. So
I guess the only thing we can do additionally in that transport space is if there are if there are multiple hops in the transport, so for instance, going through intermediaries, then you can actually get that transport acknowledgement in theory all the way through to the end through a series of maybe received statuses if you really wanted to, given you're not necessarily party to each of those HTTP requests through the staging.
Which is kind of akin to what goes on in V2 with message of providers like health link, medical objects, right? When you intend to send it to the lab or the doctor, but who you actually send it to is HealthLink, and they give you a transport acknowledgement that really just says to you, HealthLink has successfully received your message, and then HealthLink then delivers that message through how many hops they like, but eventually to the destination system, the doctor or the lab. And then when that's successful, HealthLink comes back to you asynchronously and says the application act to say it's now successfully delivered to the intended recipient. So we have a similar thing in Fire. You're delivering it to a Fire server. It's giving you acknowledgement to say it's now safely in the Fire server. And then the recipient is then pulling it out of the Fire server, updating the Fire server to say, I now have it, which is then echoed back to the sender. So I guess that going deeper and deeper into it, we have akin to the HL7 and beyond.
Anyone got any questions about the acknowledgement support?
Short of the story, Fire covers more than V2 does.
Yeah, equal to and more of. Yeah.
Equal to and more, yeah.
I think really this was a topic for Vince. I think Vince wanted to hear this. So we're probably maybe waste a bit of time if Vince isn't here, because it's Vince who was very keen to understand.
Yeah. All right, let me move on. Back to the agenda.
And the other part of that we're continuing to do today, the Fire Specimen stuff, including Fire Specimen.
Yeah, so I'll just jump ahead. Bundle workstream, that David has now been merged into the CI build, so it's all good to go. So if you go and look at the current build, in fact, this is the current build, current CI build, and if you go and look at the artifacts, it now has the bundle stuff in there. The proposal is that this is the IG that we will take through to the next Connectathon so that people can start practicing with some of those Fire bundles as opposed to just inventing their own bundle story along that path. Right. Angus, have you got anything to talk about the must supports?
Yes.
In Specimen?
Specimen? Yes.
Excellent. I shall cease sharing then. If you have something to go.
Share. Yeah. See the slide? Oh,
yes, we can.
It's not Thursday, 30th of July. I haven't updated that, so I'll move on. Okay, so today we're going to try and continue our conversation about specimens. So the Specimen Fire resource to hold information about physical specimens being collected. Just a recap on where we've come to. So we've just discussed these options, different types of context of how we're recording specimen, and what we're focusing on at present is this number 2 here in the red box. Use the specimen resource to record the details of a specimen that has been collected, for instance, in the requester's office. So today at 10:30 a.m. today, I collected a pus swab from the wound on the back of a patient's hand. So that's our sort of use case, our scope of what we're talking about. In Fire, that is these things in the red box. So we're in the eRequesting working group. So the rest of that structure is about ordering pathology. So the service request is where you actually say, I would like a full blood count, or I would like a swab, or what the order is. And then we're proposing, it would have a reference to a specimen resource, which would hold all the information about the specimen for that request. Sorry, this also articulates diagnostic report, which we haven't standardized yet, but FHIR has a diagnostic report and it links to specimen. So, but we're not talking about specimen data returned with a report here. We're talking about specimen data that's coming inbound with the order. So I think there's a very clear distinction there. We are not talking about reporting. We're talking about ordering. So just looking at some sort of things, standards around the place that we have to be aware of and what they say. So this is the ISO 15189, the laboratory standards. So this is part of their NADA requirements. So request form information does clearly highlight type of primary sample and where relevant the atomic site or origin. So that we think of that as sample type and body site, location where it come from, date and where relevant time of primary sample collected, date and time of sample receipt. So that's more when it comes into the lab. So the last one's probably less out of our scope because we're not doing reporting. So we're not doing like when did sample hit the lab. We're recording the samples the doctor has collected or that has come with the order. Sorry. How do I go back? Losing my way. Right, so this one, NPAC requirements. So this is not the ISO standard, but the requirements for information communication and reporting in Australia. And it's got a statement that date and time the sample was collected where given. It's and I'll point out that that's talking in the same breath about reporting and ordering. I think many of us know that it's pretty critical to have the collection date and time of a sample.
What's the where given mean?
Where given? Well, if you're a lab and you're not given it, you have to handle that problem. But so I think that's the edge case. I've been in labs and you get samples and there's no collection date and time on them. And they do weird things like in the report, they'll say no collection date and time provided, or they might reject to do it at all. Or some of them just put the collection date and time as 00000, meaning we didn't really get one. I think that's what it's kind of covering.
It kind of almost says you must make this optional.
Yeah, I think it's more,
unfortunately,
you need to think about what to do if you didn't get one.
Okay.
This is a very new standard that's in draft at the moment, coming out of IHE. They've got a document out for consultation at the moment called Australian Laboratory Testing Workflow Supporting Adoption of NPAC Accreditation Requirements for Pathology Laboratories. This is built on top of ADRM and the RCPA SPEAR stuff. It's very new. It's out for comment at the moment. But just in there, the first one at the top here is really about results. So collection date and time. So there's a conformance requirement that OBR7, and we're talking about V2 here, collection date and time, the time of the event, specimen collection date and time is required in the OAU or the HL7 message, but that's results, and the one below is orders. So if the specimen type is not explicitly specified in the field OBR15 specimen source or pathology request, then blood, serum, or serum plasma is the assumed specimen type, unless there is more common specimen type for the particular test, e.g. the specimen type for frozen sections is always tissue. So I think they're kind of saying that the ordered test can sometimes have compounded in it the specimen type, but it can also be put in OBR 15. So I think it's just interesting that they've got this comment about a default assumption if you don't have specimen type. So just keep that in mind. I'm not saying we're going to do that in FHIR, but that's what they're doing in V2. And this link down the bottom goes to the ADRM standard. So just a quick look at that. So this is the HL7 standard. It has, scroll down, it has this OBR 15, which is exactly what that slide was just talking about, OBR 15 here. And so OBR 15, it can actually hold a whole lot of stuff like source, specimen source name, additives, free text, body site, site modifier collection. And then they've got some codes in here, which are very just HL7 table codes. So this is like specimen type, and they have a big long list of those. And if I get below those, there's another list here, which is the body site, and they have list here. No, they're not SNOMED codes. They're sort of Australian HL7 V2 standard table codes, and there's nothing below that. That's where it ends. So really they've and I think it's somewhat contradictory. Let's scroll back up to here, that they make this statement at the end. So SNOMED C2 AU is recommended as the terminology source for this field, but then we have this table below you, which is not which is not SNOMED. So they sort of tell you one way to do it and tell you probably shouldn't do it that way. You should do it another way. and it's the same for the table below. They make the same statement here. The components of C data type refer to this table below. SNOMED C2 AU is recommended for terminology source. So it's sort of hedging their bets. Anyway, that's just a review of what sort of exists around us. Happy for anyone else to raise anything else we're not looking at that we should be looking at in that sort of sense. I'll move on. So one more thing is the...
So Angus, just some of the things you talk about, when you say some things are just for resulting. And I know I get this as an eRequesting in eRequesting spec, but if we're going to start looking at reporting, and we don't want to have to use, we want to use this spec, and this reporting spec will refer to this one, like based on the service request. Do we want to start thinking more broadly?
I think we definitely should always be, and probably haven't enough in this working group to date, we should always be thinking about this question, like, are we building a fire resource that if we think about it, will obviously be used in reporting, reused in reporting, right? Is that true? I think the specimen's interesting, and because the information you get about a specimen inbound from, say, a doctor or whoever's collecting it is going to be less verbose, less, dare I say, accurate than what you potentially could get in a pathology report coming out of a lab who literally assess that sample, know more about that sample, tested on that sample, and are reporting, we performed our testing on this sample, and they're far more, dare I say, skilled about the additives that are in the tube you gave them. It's a bit of a mishmash of the two, right? Like, they obviously don't know when you collected it, you need to tell them, but when you give them like a blue top citrate tube, they know it's a citrate tube, they know the additive in it because it's manufactured as one of those. But many, and I'm not asserting doctor's knowledge, but for them, it might be just sort of rote learning that, for this test, I do a blue tube, but the why they do a blue tube, and I'm sure a lot of them do know, but the lab 100% knows, because they produce quality results based on the samples you give them. And the color coding of the tube is a nice thing that tells people, hey, use a blue top for this test. But a lot of people probably don't know why they're using a blue top. And that's because it's got a particular additive in it. And that's the additive required for that test. So the lab sort of has more granular information. So I don't think the lab is going to echo back the sample, that the resource that came inbound, right? They could. And they could also outbound there. If I go back to this diagram that we had at the beginning, this diagram, this link here does not have to point to the same specimen resource as this link here, right? So there could be a specimen resource provided to the lab in the order, and the lab could report back using a separate specimen resource that's attached to their report, i.e. the specimen as they saw it, whilst also giving you the specimen that was associated with the order, i.e. the specimen as the person who collected it saw it.
Well, they wouldn't have to give you that in theory, because if your diagnostic report is referencing that service request, they have it. I think it's a good that's a good call out, and it probably kind of says that we should make sure that the specimen profile that we're creating is particularly scoped as the requesting specimen profile, not as a reporting specimen profile.
Which is back to this slide here. So we're talking about 2, recorded specimen, collected specimen. We're not talking about 4, specimen information that accompanies the report. But all through this, I'd like people to be constantly thinking about that, right? Like, should they be the same thing? You know, I think it's questionable whether they should be, but I think it's a very good question to be asking ourselves often.
Well, the other thing is if there are 2 separate specimen references, you would kind of hope that the specimen is compatible with the one that was provided in the request, as in, you know, it's actually describing a completely different specimen. So you kind of want the reporting specimen to be a kind of subtype of the requesting specimen, you'd imagine. Like it can't now be something completely different.
I suspect the practicality of what will happen is e-orders will come in with service requests linked to a specimen, the specimen the doctor provided with the order. Reports will go back with the service request, but without that reference to the specimen, i.e. the specimen inbound. It will come back with a diagnostic report. So this will be used, pointing to a specimen the lab is telling you about, their information about the specimen, and they may neglect to give you that line specimen. So they go, yeah, this is a report in response to this service request, but we're not going to echo back sample information that inbound on the service request. We're going to send back the sample information as we saw it against the diagnostic report. But
yeah, and obviously it's not clear that you actually have to provide a copy of anything at all, given you've got the reference, and presumably if you're delivering that, then if you're delivering it back through a round trip request, it should be kind of in a common repository to provide it, or a reference at least accessible to it. But
yeah,
you absolutely can't change.
You can't delete. I know what you're saying.
You can't change the service request specimen.
You're getting back to this reference, right? This reference here, is this a reference directly to the service request that came inbound? And it highly likely is, unless it's a unsolicited report that didn't have an order, like it came on a paper form. Therefore, you do not have a service request, but you're trying to report it back to someone. You need a service request because that's where the requesting doctor information lives. So now you have to generate your own service request as the lab. And now are you now going to point that specimen to this specimen? Like these are,
because you shouldn't be removing the service request reference to the specimen. You could not provide the resource, that's fine, but you absolutely can't be modifying the request.
I guess at the end of the day, you could look at a whole graph that is a whole order in, result back, and potentially the result back is pointing to the exact same service request that came in, which is pointing to the specimen that was provided with the service request coming in. Yet the diagnostic report specimen link might point to a different specimen resource, which is the vision that the lab had of the specimen. They're talking about the same specimen, but they're talking about it in the context of this is how we saw it as the lab, as opposed to that's how you saw it, the requester.
David's got a question, but I'm not quite sure what it is. David, do you want to?
Oh, in the chat, yep.
Yeah, no, it just sounds like it's in data management. You think about the object going through its life cycle, and it sounds like the specimen has its own life cycle. It depends on who looks at it, the amount of detail you're collecting, and that's why I think earlier you talked about former and after as sort of 2 sets of levels of detail that you could collect. And so I'm thinking, yeah, that's probably makes a lot of sense then to recognize who's added the more detail.
Yeah, you got to kind of separate the concepts of the life cycle of the physical object versus the life cycle of the various information artifacts that are referencing that physical artifact, and you might have two very completely separate specimen information artifacts that have their own life cycle, but they just happen to be, in theory, talking about a common physical thing.
Yeah, and you totally lost me on how the specimen can also be something different from after you sent it in. But anyway, that's all right. That's probably medical stuff.
I don't think I was trying to infer that it would be different. I just think people think of, if I gave a pathology sample, like a blue top sample, to someone in the street and said, describe that, they would describe it in their common language, right? And it's a container with a blue top, and I don't know, it looks like it's got some red stuff in it. And then, so they would record that, right? I've asked them to record it, that's what they say. If I then gave that sample to a pathologist in the lab, he'd say, oh, this is a pathology sample. It's in a blue top, so it has a citrate, an additive added to it. It's got whole blood in it, and he would describe it in a very detailed way because he knows a lot about it, right? And I'm trying to, that's kind of the point. It's like the person sending the sample in knows less about it than the person receiving it because they're experts in it. The person sending in, and I'm not trying to disperse that doctors don't know, but they potentially know less detail about that sample than the person who received it.
It's the spectrum of interest to the person who's actually dealing with the object.
True.
Yeah. Good.
Okay, let's move on. So where were we? So the last artifact was this. So this is the RCPA's requesting pathology terminology reference set. This is where we get our we prefer to get our SNOMED codes for the actual tests. I can show you the spreadsheet here. This is the terminology binding for requesting. So for instance, if I search in here for full blood count, here somewhere. There it is. They just don't use the acronym. So, for instance, full blood count. This is the SNOMED term that you order it by, and what I'm just highlighting is this column. So they have recommended sample types for the things you're ordering, but this is an uncontrolled set again. They just chose to the word serum and the word whole blood and the word 24-hour urine. Is that a SNOMED term? No. Is that the term that came out of the V2 spec, these terms? No. It's just their word for what sample they think you should use for this test. So we do suffer a problem that when you talk about sample type, sort of, the RCPA lists some words in their ordering catalog to talk about samples. The V2 spec lists some words that describe sample types, which are a different set. And then in FHIR, we have some SNOMED terms that talk about sample types. So just highlighting, there's almost three different catalogs of sort of sample types going on here. Delise?
Yes, I just wanted to mention you've done a really great job of, highlighting a serious problem here because, this is obviously going far beyond just the specimen resource in FHIR. The problem is that the current resources that are available in the HL7 V2 world are not being maintained to keep up with what's happening elsewhere. And that, that means in terms of availability of and access to SNOMED resources and, all these progressive use cases in the requesting and reporting cycle in pathology, even things around gender and whatnot. And so, yeah, my case is just to say that the HL7 V2 and ADRM standards in Australia need to be maintained. And full disclosure, Brett did ask me to manage a orders and observations working group at the end of last year, but I didn't have time to pick it up at that point. So Maybe that's something the agency, if there's anyone on the line from the agency, could consider resourcing that. Thank you. Thanks, Angus.
Thanks, Felice. Yeah, and look, I'm not trying to poke at any of them. I'm just trying to lay the landscape we have now. And I think it's a good point that we've learnt a lot about how to manage terminology better. And Fire has adopted a lot of better strategies about managing terminology. And I guess this is about uplifting to that. Because Delise is right. Like in V2, we did the best we did with the tools we had at the time. And you know, it's great that we at least have like a table for people to choose from. But as she's highlighting, like, who updates this table? What authority does this table have? Like, we can offload that problem to the terminology people and SNOMED, right? We can just say, these are the SNOMED codes for sample type. And there's a whole lot of experts all across the world who are updating that list of sample types in time to make sure it's always valid, or at least at a higher cadence than is happening with an Australian V2 standard. And then that flows down into the Fire standards, because terminology in Fire is sort of dynamic, right? You don't necessarily say these are the codes and it's locked in the standard. They move with the codes, right? So if tomorrow SNOMED says there's another sample type because they've invented another one, in time that flows down into the Fire spec without even changing the Fire spec. Like the code system gets dragged into the value set. You know. Okay, we'll keep going. Where were we? Yeah. So, yep, so just highlighting, so that they advise in the terminology when you order something, this is the sample type you should be collecting. Okay, so must supports. I didn't really want to talk about that slide, this slide. So let's look at the IG that we've mocked up. So Specimen, this one, isn't it? See, yep. So this is a beta version of the Specimen resource that we're trying to build, right? So if anything, this is the thing we're building, and this is a beta prototype of it. What we really want to focus on today is these red flags here, which are the must supports. So what they're saying to implementers is, if we just talk about this one property here, it's optional, right? So some implementers, developers might go, it's optional, I don't need to worry about it. And they just ignore it, move on, right? This red flag is here to say to those developers, you're not allowed to just move on. What we're saying is, if you have an identifier for this specimen, you must give it to us. But if you do not have an identifier, you physically do not have it, then you're allowed to make it optional. And that's a different requirement to, say, text here, where we are literally saying, it's optional, you know, don't think about it. But here we're saying it's optional, but you must think about it. You must provide it if you have it. And that's what the red flags are doing. What they really come down to, it's sort of like better than cardinality. Like, you could force things like this, where the developer has no choice. Like, the tools will prevent him from putting nothing there because it's 1-1. So he now is forced to make a choice. He has to go, I have to choose one of these concepts to put here and work it out. But that falls down when something's optional, right? Like, it's valid to not give it to us, but that doesn't mean just ignore it. So what we're trying to work on here is really these cardinalities and these red flags, and which ones do we need to address? And some ones we've had a bit of a crack at this. Michael, is Michael Osborne here?
No, he's not. He's an apology today.
So Michael did this a couple of weeks ago. I haven't changed it, but we are here today to talk about it and try and lock it in. And that's what this slide here is about. I haven't got every property here, but I've got the ones that I think we are going to want to talk about. And we're trying to make a decision about what is its cardinality. Is it optional and you can provide many? Is it optional and you can provide one? Is it non-optional, you must give us one? And then the must support, which means you must consider it. You must consider it. So that in mind, back to this. I guess it's worth walking down it a bit. I'll also highlight the discussion we had last week about container for those that were here. A specimen resource in Fire can potentially be many containers. And you may remember, if you were here last week, we went through a whole lot of sample types. So we looked at, a PSA has one sample. This is many tests, but they use one sample. But then we had this scenario, histo, where you've now got 3 samples, 3 containers, but they're kind of like one sample. Like it's a breast biopsy, but this was the top, this was the middle, this is the bottom. And they're one sample, but they're broken into 3 containers. You had scenarios like this, a sputum times 3, which is really just 3 tests. I could multiply that and say, well, times 3 really just means that is what that means. So really, you've got 1 sample for each. If they're just over 3 different days. We had this scenario, glucose tolerance test, where you've got like baseline, you got 2 samples, but they're now different containers. So we walked through all these different scenarios. And one thing that we sort of arrived at, not sure if we agreed, but whether we just keep it simple and say 1 sample, 1 specimen resource is allowed 1 container. So change this to 1.1, or do we leave it open to star.many? Or do we just have advice that says, even though you can have many, we'd advise that you only have 1. So just highlighting that 1 specimen resource doesn't necessarily mean 1 container. It could, and we here need to make decisions about this, could mean 1 specimen, but I've got 3 containers, or 4, 5, 10 containers for the 1 specimen. We just talked about this a lot last week and found it very difficult. There's no right or wrong answer, right? Like the histo example we had, there's no good or wrong or right reason to say that is that 3 specimens, or is that 1 specimen and 3 containers? Do we leave it for people out there to just make their own choice? Some will do 3 specimens, some will do 1 specimen, or do we be a bit more strict and go, no, that is 3 specimens for simplicity?
If your standard's going to be useful, it has to map what's in the real world. So, and that will tie down to how people go about identifying and labeling within their laboratories. And so if they've got a single specimen ID covering 3 containers, if our standard is going to actually allow them to implement as they do it in the real world, then we don't lose anything by modeling the complexity, but recommending a practice. But if we fail to model the complexity, there will be places where our standard will break.
I agree, but your identifier example sort of doesn't help, because there's an identifier here. There's also an accession number here, and then every container can have an identifier. Yeah. So I somewhat agree with, we don't want to we're not trying to hide the complexity, but are we going to allow people, like, you can have all the complexity and still model it 2 ways. So do we let people model it 2 ways, or do we let them model it 1 way?
But isn't it the fact is that it's really 1 specimen? They've just put it in 3 different containers. And whether you want to remember that it's all come from the same thing or not depends on how you've identified it in the first place. And it sounds like you have, and said, oh yeah, here's the identifier for the specimen. And by the way, it sits in that container and that one and that one. And I guess if you want to track it, then you're always tracking it with a container number. So
if we let them put many specimens in many containers in 1 sample, so if we let them make 3 here under 1, then it's going to be pretty hard for us to not have an identifier for the group. And now you're insisting that they create an identifier for a group. I don't think doctors see it that way. What I felt we arrived at last week is we're talking about the collection of samples in like a doctor's collection room and collection nurses. And in their world, they see what they see in front of them, right? They see this world. they're not information modelers. They don't see that as one sample with 3 containers. They see that as 3 containers. And then we had a proposal that for simplicity, that's 3 specimens. Yes, they're the same, it's more aligning to the people who are using this, right? They just see 3 containers. And you could say, yeah, but is that 1 specimen or is that 3 specimens? And they could go, oh, well, it's kind of like 1 specimen. We cut it up into 3 parts and put it in 3 containers. But at the end of the day, I've got 3 specimens.
But this example here, though, is specifically decided that this is the differentiation of the specimen required for that test. So it's almost like a recursive on itself. You can. You can remember, I used to be a part of a bigger specimen, I suppose. I guess maybe that's what you're trying to say.
Well, what about this scenario, right? So I guess these are 3 specimens. The first 2 are the same specimen. Like they're the same blood drawn out of the human at the same time, but one's put in a purple top, one's put in a yellow top, right? So that's probably a better argument for 1 specimen resource, 2 containers. But I'd come back to like, no one out there actually sees that as 4 specimens, or like people just see 4 tubes and they think there's 4. Like if we start grouping them, like the lab might see it that way, but the person who's creating this resource in the collection center, in the doctor's office, they just see 4 specimens, right? They don't see as we do maybe 3. Like that's 1 specimen, that's another specimen, that's another specimen. They're taken at different times.
I guess
you can model it either way.
Just that's just different levels of metadata. Again, depends who's looking at it. That what the context is, and at times I don't. It's good. I can treat it as a container, knowing I have faith that the content is the specimen that you. And again, if you wanted to track it, all came from the same piece of.
We do have some constraints that are inherent in the file model, and that is around containers. There is only a limited set of information that can differentiate a container. So for instance, you can't put a body site on a container. It's not designed for that. So if there is a different recognition, like even left, the top, bottom, middle, you can't say that in a container. So it's got to lie with the specimen.
Why can't you say that? Why can't you get a pen and
There's
write
no
that
attribute. There's no attribute in the container.
Oh, you mean in fire?
Yeah,
Sorry, in fire.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
So down here, you're saying there's no attribute to say body site. Yeah, true. The body site is.
The interesting thing you can do is you can take a single physical sample and you can put it into multiple containers. Each container can have a different additive with it. So therefore, it is in theory for a different purpose. So it's not saying that the containers have to be replicas of one another. The containers can be differentiated, but only in very limited ways. And obviously that, I think, and then again, we got to, I think Angus highlighted R5 or R6 even, to where this is going, is that these kind of restrictions really, I guess, play into the intended use of this.
How about for now, we're trying to do MS reports, we park this and let's look at properties that aren't affected by this problem, right? Like we can talk about collection date and time. Is it mandatory or not? It really doesn't matter which tube you're talking about, right?
Well, it does in your example though, where you had 1 hour and the 2 hour tubes labeled.
Yeah, but there's only one, well, to your point, Andy, there's only one collected date and time for the collection, right? There's not a collection date and time per container.
No.
So we can't choose that, right? Like it's kind of my point about kicking the can down the road, because as you do this, you're going to realize, well, you kind of have to, if they're collected at different date and times, then that automatically is a different separate specimen resource, right?
Yes. And if they're from different differentiated sites, sites, they've got to be different.
And so collected body site. So if it's from the same if it's a different body site or a different collection date and time, it has to be a separate specimen resource, right?
Yes.
So only where they are the same collection time, same body site, could they potentially be in the same specimen, or they could still be in two different specimen resources, right? But I wanted to have this conversation just because as we talk about the properties, this is in your mind, right? And I think, I don't know if we want to make this decision yet, but we can at least identify that this property depends on that decision. So let's defer it for now and let's deal with properties that don't depend on that decision.
Okay.
So let's go to our properties. So I want to kind of focus on these. So let's start with, let's maybe skip the identifiers because they deal with that sort of problem, right? Let's talk about status. So we'll go back to here. Let's talk about specimen status. This at the moment, per Michael's draft, had it must support, meaning developers must make a decision about status, but it's optional, meaning they don't have to give us one, but they really need to decide whether to think about it. And we're here not to abide by those rules, we're here to make these rules. So this is just a draft. So let's look at what it says. The availability of the specimen, I'll just click on it. Status, the availability of the specimen. You've got this specimen is labeled as a modifier because the status contains codes that mark the resource as not currently valid. The codes shall come from specimen status, so we're not allowed to change this set. We have to use this. It's a modifier is true. So what they're trying to say by this being a modifier is they're trying to say if the specimen is unavailable, then that really makes it, modifies what you have. If it's available, this property makes a big change in what you actually have. If you say it's available, that's very different to saying it's unavailable.
So I think in this use case though, why would you have anything except available?
Yeah, I was getting there. Yeah, I think this one, unless anyone wants to put their hand up, I think this is a dawdle because we're not talking about specimens you propose someone might create someday in the future. We're talking about a specimen you literally have on the table in front of you. You just took it. If you do not have a specimen, then we do not want you to give us a specimen resource.
And you can't modify, once it's been created, you shouldn't be modifying its status. For instance, let's say the specimen spoiled on the way to the lab.
It's hemolyzed. It sat in the car, it got hot and it hemolyzed, and now it's unusable by the lab, even though it was usable when it was collected.
Yeah, but you're not going to go back and the lab's not retrospectively modifying the specimen resource in the request to say it's unavailable now.
No, and that's our conversation we had at the start. The lab may report a different specimen resource that says the specimen was hemolyzed, therefore the results are unworthy or not valid. But that's a different instance. That's their view of the specimen, not this is a truthful statement about what the doctor collected. And when he collected, it wasn't hemolyzed. It's the courier who left it in his car in the hot sun that became hemolyzed. So I agree with Andy. We're recording a locked-in state and time when the doctor collected this sample. As far as he was concerned, it was available. And then and absolutely, when it gets to the lab may have a different view, but that's a different instance of the resource. So does anyone? So I would propose that this would be 1.1. We would want people to populate it, and we would restrict it to available. We don't want people to give us things that are unavailable or unsatisfactory. I don't know. What about unsatisfactory? Do we allow them to record a specimen which they right away admit is unsatisfactory?
David.
No, like you said, it's all available. You're in the game. Like, don't throw me any bad data right off the start, right?
I agree. They're sitting there with the patient collecting the sample. If they're collecting an unsatisfactory sample, then throw it in the bin and create another one, right? Don't send it to us if you already know it's unsatisfactory. That would be something the lab would do in response to getting an unsatisfactory sample. It's not something the collector. We don't ask collection nurses to collect unsatisfactory samples and send them to us.
No, and if there was an issue with the sample, you would imagine that would be in a clinical note associated with the service request to kind of have something, unless there was a very common set of use cases that said this should absolutely be structured within the specimen resource for this. But I agree. I can't see why you would do that.
So shall I chuck votes out here, Andy? I guess so. Shall I?
Yeah, you
I
might as well.
So we're saying it's mandatory. You give us one. You have to give us it. Yep.
I propose, so, and we'll go back to this slide. So we're talking about status here. So I propose it's 1.1 and it equals available. Smaller font.
Does anyone disagree that that's an alternative view?
We'll vote, shall we? So
well.
I propose a vote that specimen status will be mandatory 1.1, must support, and will be hard coded to available. Have
seconder.
I can second that, Dave McKillop.
McKillop, anyone against? Anyone want to step away? Unanimous. Next.
So how many people we got?
21 minus, that's 20.
What was it? -1? Oh, there's an AI.
I'm not voting. No, I'm not voting.
Me?
Hopefully you're not counting AIs.
I'll just record that for later. I voted 20 pos. Okay, yay, we've done one. Okay, let's do what is probably a harder one. Type. Type. So type is bound to a set of codes, kind of material that forms the specimen. So let's just read the descriptions on it. Type. The kind of material that forms the specimen. Kind of material that forms the specimen.
Angus, can you just make it a bit bigger, thanks?
Yep, sorry.
So.
The type can change the way that a specimen is handled and drives what kind of analysis can properly be performed on the specimen. It is frequently used in diagnostic workflow decision-making systems. Let's look at the value set currently bound to it, which Michael bound to it, which is this. So if I open this up, do this little trick where you grab this, put it up here, you actually get to see the codes. Right, so this is the sort of codes we're talking about type. I will go back to this slide we presented.
Bigger, bigger,
sorry,
please, Angus.
Yep, let me go back to that. Yep, let's go bigger.
Thank you.
So, abscess tissue, and there's a lot of codes here. So if I scroll down the bottom, there are like 153. It's not actually lots, but reasonably. Nail specimen, lymph node aspirate. It's trying to, this is the body fluid material, vaginal swab, genital swab. And if we go back to the slide we looked at, these 6 elements of the specimen resource, this is this middle one, third, specimen type, the kind of material that forms the specimen. At this stage, I don't think I necessarily want to vote on the value set binding, but do we agree that it's 1.1 and must support? I think we could agree on that. Like, don't want people to give us specimens that don't tell us what the specimen is. Like here is a container. What's in that container? I don't know. Like,
yeah, that seems already reasonable.
Yeah. So can I motion a vote that specimen type will be must support, as seen on screen, will be mandatory 1.1. We'll defer what are the codes you can pick from for now. We're just accepting that you must have some sort of code, and we'll talk later about what that binding, what those codes would be.
Can I just ask on the intention of type? with respect to body site, because I did see that the type was inclusive in some cases of body site, as opposed to the actual, is this serum, is this blood, is
like high vaginal swab is got the body site kind of built into it.
Yes, and that I'm just kind of curious whether that was the intention of type, or I'm going back to your V2, which was far simpler because they seem to focus only on the actual type of it.
Yeah, it's a good point. That what we're talking about in V2 was literally this list here. And so I assume there's probably a high vaginal swab in here. If I go to the no, I missed it. No, there isn't. Hair. What do they have? Genital. So this is the V2 list, which is only, I don't know, to guess 50, 60 terms. But this is exactly the same concept, right? Like if we were talking about what are we going to bind to specimen type, V2 has bound this list. This is their specimen type.
And I'm presuming swab is in here as a.
So yeah, I was just
type.
trying to look for like something like high vaginal swab or.
And that other list that is a SNOMED list, right? And so if you link up with that one, then you're relying, or at least you're aligned with whatever list that's up to date with.
That's a list of SNOMED terms, but as Linda pointed out, you could create an intentional ECL kind of spec and say everything which is under the type of specimen, and then you collect all of those things. But this seems almost like the physical kind of aspect of type, whereas I don't know, I'm curious about where that other system came from.
Yeah, see, it's like if you're even just sticking with the high vaginal example, like you can see it side by side, but they had, no, I've lost it. Like they've got, let's see it. It's a genital A, B, C, D, E, F, G.
See, it's weird. It's weird in that okay, that's reporting you're doing though, but things like, for instance, cervix, that seems to be more a body site than a type of sample or specimen.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm kind of curious about making it mandatory, and that should you be able to say this is simply has a body site, and I mean you kind of have to say, well, what was the specimen?
But body site's not enough, is it? Like you can't just tell me, like.
But then I don't know when you say genital, for instance, genital doesn't to me come across as a type of a specimen.
It just happens to be named that way, it's just named that way. It's like.
So let's talk about your left arm, right? I could take pus out of your left arm. I could take a scraping from some flaky skin on your left arm. I could cut a mole off your left arm.
Yep.
Like the fact that you know the body site doesn't tell you the specimen.
No, I agree. I'm just thinking that looking at these examples, there seems to be a variety of kind of uses of type, and we're going to end up with that situation where, well, what happens if your body site disagrees with specimen type?
But I think
Nairi.
I was going to say that exact same thing, Andy. I think we gave the use case earlier on that you wouldn't take like a fecal sample from, a right brachial vein or anything like that. Like, so the body's height is not. It seems to me that the specimen type needs to be really restricted to actual things like for the vaginal swab. It's not a high vaginal swab, it's the tissue, isn't it, that's on the swab. that is being, or
agree.
the cells that are being examined. So the location is the vaginal the vaginal area, but it's not what is actually in the specimen. The specimen type is tissue or squamous cells or pus or whatever descriptor
but it's
we
common
want
language, isn't it? But it's common language. Like if you tell a lab I have a high vaginal swab, they automatically know in their brain that you have issues on a swab from. But by saying what, it's kind of implying the procedure, like almost, and then they infer, well, we know what we've got here because of you've described it that way. I agree with you that it's the tissue on the end of the swab, but
yeah.
But what are we going to are we going to say a high vaginal swab is actually a specimen type tissue body site vaginal high?
But that's the difference with the name of the test that you're asking for. We're kind of overloading this into the specimen types. I think that's why it's difficult. And Linda raised a really good point. So I think, Linda, you're saying that descendants of specimen do not include a body site, which kind of gives me a lot of satisfaction to see that, because
the ones that
I worry that
body site and then include the body site separately in a separate field.
Yeah, I worry when we kind of go, oh, it's all good because it's a SNOMED value set, so we'll just use that. Whereas you can grab all sorts of random things and stick in a SNOMED value set, a value set with SNOMED things. It doesn't necessarily mean it actually makes logical sense for what you're trying to achieve.
I agree, but we're going to have it's large and complicated, right? Like, are we going to sit and vet every specimen type SNOMED code in the value set? I mean, someone obviously has, or we're going to re-prosecute that? Like,
I was just coming back to your original kind of thing of saying we think that the type should be mandatory, and I completely agree. I'm all good with that. But I think, as you say, that the binding strength and the actual value set, I think, is going to need some, very clear guidance on that, because you're going to end up with a bunch of codes that need to sit well together and make sense together with different parts of the specimen data.
Yeah, and typically when building those data systems, you're going to build those rule tables, right? To say these are valid combinations of this and that. So whether we do it or they do it, I guess, ultimately, is that what we're saying?
I'm less worried about the conflict. Like, I agree a conflict can happen, but trained staff in the lab are going to spot the conflict a mile away, right? Like, if you tell me you've got a feces swab coming from their left ear, or maybe
that was the only one I could get.
Well, there'll be lots of examples. There'll be maybe there was some fecal matter in their ear. I don't know, but it's kind of, we're not going to be able to write the table rules that say this specimen type can't come from that body site, but logical people working in healthcare will see the contradiction.
And so data quality rules, hence now we're sort of getting into that. So what's ultimately, anyway, thanks.
David McKillop.
I think Michael's done this. I think what's on there is fine. It's mandatory 1-to-1 specimen type preferred, job done. I don't think we should try and make foolproof for idiots. You're never going to get that sorted.
I agree, and that's why I wanted to defer the value set, because we all just looked at the value set and went, oh, should high vaginal be in the value set? I think that's another conversation, but can we not agree that we need a type? Like, what are the codes under the type? Another conversation, but we absolutely need a type. Like, are we going to allow no type?
Okay,
Nari?
Oops, just quickly, I was just going to say, is this something that we need to refer back to James about the terminology IG? Is this an example that we could potentially raise? Because it's something in the work group that is, I mean, look, we're not going to specify, like, we're not going to lock it down, like David said, but it could be an example that could be used potentially. I don't know.
I think it's potentially in their court, and this is where the terminology group is going to have tough time all around, right? Because we're kind of like the experts or this group about what should the codes be. They're the terminology experts, and they have a bit of an opinion, but so it's always across. I agree, it can go to them, like because specimen types are probably going to be used in other resources, other work groups.
But I think also the example around the fact that body site is listed in the value set of specimen type is something that group maybe need to look at it potentially. I don't know.
Yeah. Because again, standards based, right? We want consistency everywhere. Happy to join in the best practice that everyone's doing.
I also see it as two, like, unlike V2, where they baked into their standard the list of codes.
Yeah.
Here it's like a two-step process, right? We can make a decision about you must have a code and it must come from this set. And we can say that 100%, right? But then that set can change in time, right? So people can go review that set and say, this shouldn't be here and these should be in here. And that's really not saying anything about our spec that we're talking about here. We're just saying there is a value set of things that are called specimen type, but we're not necessarily voting on what they are in there. We can look at what's in there today. Tomorrow it may change. The decision we're making is that there is a property on the specimen resource called type, and it will pick a code from this value set called specimen type, but we're not making a decision about what is every single code in there. We're looking at it to make sure it's sort of in the ballpark of what we should be attaching to this property, but we're not necessarily looking at 200 codes and reviewing every one of them. That is a job of the owners of the value set, terminology, if you will. It's in our remit, but it's not. It's a separate process, in my view.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we can get to the vote. Janie.
Yeah, I was just going to say you're looking too closely because there's some types that are dependent on the body type. For example, in the genital tissue, whereas skin is skin. So it's only needed where it's needed, and I think we're trying to pin it down too much.
Okay.
It's not pinned down. It's only preferred binding. So if somebody wants to use the V2 value set, they can. And so I think it's pretty open. And I think as the thing moves along, you might want to constrain it to extensible using the SNOMED list. But at the moment, it's not constrained to the fight.
I agree.
It's only preferred.
What I'm
so
proposing is not talking
good.
about. Yeah, and I'm voting. I'm trying to say we're not going to vote on whether this is correct or whether the binding's correct. We're voting on this red thing here and this one here.
Okay. And so you were going to move that we.
So I motion that specimen.type will be as seen on screen, must support, and required 1.1.
With the binding and the value set left for subsequent discussion.
We're going to do another pass on all bindings and value sets it'll be a later decision about, is this the correct value set and is this the correct binding? So this vote is not about this being the correct value set or this being the correct binding. It's simply about, do we agree that type is must support and must be provided? So I propose that it is must support and 1.1.
Any seconder?
Sure.
Anyone?
I can.
I second.
Except Angus.
I will.
Does anyone vote negative on that? Anyone abstain? Okay, I think you're convincing, Angus.
Yep.
What's next?
20.
Probably
notes here. Yep. All right. So what next? So what was next in this list? Type subject. I think this one, hopefully this one's easy. Subject, the patient, eRequesting patient must support 1.1. I vote that a specimen resource must tell us which patient it is for. It's must support 1.1 and it will point to the eRequesting patient resource. I have a seconder on that one.
Sign me up.
Excellent. I'm glad this one isn't controversial. Does anyone want to vote negative?
Does anyone disagree that a specimen needs a patient?
Does anyone want to abstain? Next. 20.
That's 20. Next is receive time. So I don't know why I even had this in the list. I don't even really want to vote on this. I think we're just leaving it as it is. Receive time is about when the lab gets the sample. It's not about when you collect it, right? So absolutely.
It's a bit bigger, thanks, Angus.
Yeah. So I'm not even going to vote to change it, right? Does anyone disagree that when we record a sample from the doctors, that there's a receive time? Like receive time is what the lab would record when they get the specimen, and that would be in the specimen that the lab reports.
Yeah, I don't.
Be in this here.
I just focus on the attributes that you're actually making.
Yeah. All right, we'll skip that one. So that was receive request. So I do think this needs a change. So at the moment, Michael had it as 0 star because I know when he did this, we were contemplating the multiple options for our scope. But I think given we are now clearly talking about a specimen collected in a doctor's surgery or a specimen collected with the order, I think it will have an AU eRequesting service request. So just like patient above, I think every specimen needs to be associated with the service request. I think that's true. A doctor's going to send in specimens. They're going to order a full blood count, send us in a urine, and go, oh, they just have this urine. It's got nothing to do with the full blood count request. Just here's a have a urine. Like I think we want. Well, actually, what about this scenario we talked about? Yeah. Are we saying you must list off, and it is many, isn't it? Request star. Are we going to insist in this scenario that if you give me a specimen resource for that sample on the right, that you are to list out that it's being given to me for all of those tests? Or is that not required?
I have another issue. I've got another issue here, Angus, that we already have a reference from the service request to the specimen. Having then a specimen to service request, I think just introduces potential risk in conflicts. That what if they don't match?
Yeah.
And I don't see the value that having this dual reference. I'd be curious whether
the service request that required the specimen to be collected, why the specimen was collected. The request may be explicit or implied, such as the service request that requires the blood draw. And I guess what Andy's getting at is if we go to the requesting, well, no, if we just go to R4 service request, what we 100% know we're going to populate is this resource going from service request to specimen, which reads one or more specimens that the laboratory procedure will use. Need a specimen, but the request itself is not actually about the specimen. The element is for when the diagnostic is requested on already existing specimens, and the request points to the specimen it applies to. Conversely, if the request is entered first with an unknown specimen, then the specimen resource points to the, so we're implying, it's almost this last sentence, isn't it? If the request is entered first, like I've ordered a wound swab, with but I don't have the specimen, then I go collect the specimen, then the specimen resource points to the service request. Request entered first. With an unknown specimen resource points to the service request. It's kind of about the order you do things, right? But it's what they're implying. But and I accept that a doctor might sit you down, take some samples, then sit at his computer and create the request. But what he doesn't do is sit you down, take samples, record the samples in his system, then create a service request and link. He would do it the other way, or not? And it's almost arbitrary. It doesn't matter. Like at the end of the day, he's creating a service request and he has some samples. The order he did that in really doesn't matter. Whether he took the samples, then Sanity's computer, or Sanity's computer created a request and then sat you down, took the samples. It's there.
Can I throw out a spanner in the works?
No.
So in R6, specimen has been removed from service request.
Oh, really? So what Andy's saying is if I go to the next, we go up the versions to 6, you're saying? There's no specimen down here, is there?
Now, if you do a search for specimen in there, you'll see at the front it said it's been removed. There's some documentation.
Changes up the service request, remove the replicated specimen. Okay, so that is starting to flip this around the other way, isn't it?
Yeah, so they've said the correct reference is from the specimen back to the service request, which of course makes searching, it just makes it convoluted because you've got to do a reverse include to pick up specimens. But
so this is now the specimen in R6. So it has the requested and that's it. What about the extension? That's still got the extension?
That requested specimens.
Yeah.
It's still got that specimen suggestion. Yeah.
Yeah, it still has it. And did they didn't add another one to?
They didn't make that an attribute. Dan.
I'm interested to hear how then we might handle reflex orders for a single specimen if the service request is attached.
So it's very much a reporting thing, not a requesting thing. You agree?
Well, you need to have an authorization for a reflex order sometimes. So, or an add-on order with an existing specimen.
Yeah, definitely an add-on order.
That's an interesting question, given if we followed our kind of standard kind of approach where the service request is left to the requester to manage, and they were saying that the specimen as created was with that original order, you in theory you would need to replicate the specimen in the reflex order.
So can we just talk about how this happens in the real world today? So sample comes into the lab for test A and B. They do test A and B, and because of those results, the pathologist in the lab authorizes to do a test C on the same sample. They would instantly do test C, report on test C, and to do the clerical stuff right, they send a request form to the doctor for asking him to authorize that we do test C, of which he literally signs and sends back to the lab as the legal instrument that allowed them to do test C. And even though he's probably already got the result for test C, do people agree with that workflow today? Is that what we're talking about?
Aren't there two cases? I was always told that there were some tests which, yes, you had to get sign off by the requesting clinician, but there are other tests that you could do without the sign off of the original clinician. In case, for instance, I don't know, did they get one? They made an obvious mistake, and you're kind of a reflex order that is
self-determined.
Yeah, I think one common example is urine testing. When you send a sample urine for testing and the criteria that meets reflex microbiology test. And I don't know whether or not in the Australian context, whether the workflow itself requires another test form to be returned from the requesting practitioner or the lab because it fits the reflex test criteria, then you can automatically go progress to the microbiology test.
So maybe I'm confusing. So there's add-on tests, right? So it's about who wanted the test to be done in the first place, right? So the lab can do some testing, test A and B, And then the requesting doctor can ring up the lab tomorrow and say, can you do test C, which is the requesting doctor just adding another test.
Yeah, but that's not reflex test.
I know that's not reflex test,
Yep.
but that's
It's
probably
add-on.
the workflow. That's an add-on, and that's the workflow I just described, where the lab would now do test C, send him a request form for test C. He would sign it and send it back in. I think I confused the workflow. But if test C is a reflex test, then that's self-determined by the lab and the pathologist in the lab. Does that need to be approved by the requesting doctor, or isn't that on the head of the pathologist in the lab?
Just depends on whether they want to get paid for it.
Yeah, well, they want to get paid for it,
No,
but
even getting
Medicare
paid
will
for it is always
allow.
covered. It's self-referred.
Sorry, Rosemary, say that again.
Even getting paid for it is covered because it's the example that Angus just stated. It's pathologist referred.
Yeah, it's self-determined. When they claim to Medicare, they say test C was self-determined, meaning the requesting doctor didn't ask for it. Our pathologist added it on, reflected it on, if you will.
Yeah.
And therefore, it doesn't go back to the doctor to be asked to be done. It's the lab has sort of synthesized a request for themselves under the approval of their pathologist.
Hey, Angus, we're going to have to draw this to a close because we've hit time. I think we actually, I think there is a way forward in this because I think it's just this is all about who owns the specimen data and who is then able to make the change to the specimen data. But if we can go back and revisit that in the beginning of the next meeting, David, we can note that and we'll continue on through these must supports. We've got a couple under our belt, so we can then do the rest. Sorry for running a couple of minutes late, everyone. Drop the co-chairs, any of the co-chairs, pick your favourite one. A note if you have anything you would like to cover at the next meeting. Otherwise, we will be doing some more stuff around Specimen next time around. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Angus.
That went so fast.
Good job.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.